I want to talk about several things, Inyan, 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 with regard to Cheresh. The first is the Yerushalmi Sefer, who I think he's been mentioned here, who are hearing aid, and Rav Waldenberg says, Ein Peitzep Umitzavtseif. Nobody raised any issue whatsoever with his wearing a hearing aid. Well, I'll raise a little chirp. Little tziftzuf, I'm not sure, but just to clarify the Indian. Number two, I want to define Cheresh. And part of number two is two separate problems. One is the Cheresh Bizman Hazeh, the Cheresh after the Taib Stum Schule in Vienna, and a counterpart in London that the Achronim talk about. What about these Cheroshim who we managed to educate? Or they have a din of Cheresh, or don't they have a din of Cheresh? Another is related also to the same problem, a Pikeach Shenischaresh. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong. In Kuv Chof Aleph, I could not find in the Nesekelim any reference to Pikeach Shenischaresh. A real Pikeach who got, suddenly became deaf, either a result of an accident, a result of a chayli, or old age. This is unfortunately something that happens with people as they get older. Their hearing diminishes, and I know of at least one who became a cheresh mamish, who couldn't hear a word, no hearing aids would help. And he was also blind, unfortunately, which is also a terrible matzah to be in. He was dumb and deaf and blind. Fortunately, he could talk, but it didn't help very much. But where do you have Pikeach in Kuf Chaval? Yeah, in Kuf Chaval. I have Diyukim, but I do have sources in Yeridea, in Siman Aleph, Bach and Ashach. Why they're not here, I don't know. But I can't remember anything, nor with a quick chazorah did I find anything in Kuf Chof Aleph. Number 4, I want to talk about hearing aids for purposes of being Yetze Brocha, Mikra Megillah, Tkiya Shefer, and for that matter, for rabbis making Birchas Nesuin, at least Birchas Eresin certainly, but even Birchas Nesuin under a chuppah with a hearing aid, a microphone. I have no problems with the ksuba. Nobody has to hear the ksuba, nobody has to read the ksuba. I think it's a big kibbut or whatever, that's the shamosis. There's no schar for reading the ksuba. And finally, cochlear implants, which is a new form of hearing aid, but it's far, far different from most hearing aids. So let me begin. Before I begin, I've written about modern day Cheroshim in volume 2 of Contemporary Halachic Problems. And as always, when I go back and I read things I wrote decades ago, I would write it much differently now if I were writing it. I hope it would be more analytic and would have further sources. And again, I wrote about it in volume 7 with regard to cochlear implants, which is quite different from the original article on cochlear implants, which appeared in Tradition. I just made a glancing reference to the original article and proceeded to say why this has to be reviewed. I'm not sure the Maskon is the same, because I'll explain why. I hope we'll get to cochlear implants. I'm novel with regard to the science of the cochlear implants, because the same mumche gave different information to me and to somebody else. So I don't know what the Matthias is, but we'll talk about whatever there is to talk about a little bit later. But to begin with the sources, first we have the Gemara in Gittin Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph Tanya Medaber v'Nishumea Zehu Cheresh. I'm sorry, Medaber v'Nishumea. That person is Medaber v'Nishumea. That person is he's not a Cheresh, except for, we'll come to the Rambam in a second. But a Shemeya ve'ena Medaber, that the Gemara calls an Elaim, and Medaber ve'ena Shemeya, the Gemara calls a Pikeach. An Eina Medaber ve'ena Shemeya, and Ein Medaber Nishmei is what the Gemara calls a Cheresh. Now that sounds very much as everything depends upon the Chush Hashmiya. A person who can't hear is a Cheresh, and if he's a Medaber, then as far as the Gemara is concerned, he's not a Cheresh, even though he's an Ein Shemeya, and we'll have to explain why. But it turns out that the Gemara knew the science of a couple of hundred years later, more than a couple of hundred years later. In any event, in Rishonim we have two shittas. The first is the Rambam in Hilchos Mechira, Perek Tes Halacha Beis, Medaber u'shomeya ktsas. The Rambam talks about a Medaber u'shomeya ktsas, who is a Pikeach l'chol davar, as distinct from a Medaber ve'enu shomeya klum. What is a shomeya ktsas and what is ve'enu shomeya klum? This is a distinction the Rambam makes, and we'll have to define what it is. However, the problem is that the Rambam seems to be contradicting the Gemara. The Gemara says that a Medaber ve'enu shomeya is a Pikeach. Why? We'll see in a moment. But the Rambam's telling me that he's an Ein Shemeya Klum. He's still a Cheresh. He has to be a Shemeya Ktsas. Where did he get this from? And why? That's even more than where he got it from. And it seems to contradict the Gemara, as is pointed out by the Nosei Kelim, the Maggid Mishnah, on the Rambam. Comes along the Kesef Mishnah and says that when the Gemara says Medaber ve'enu Shemeya, Hainu Shemeya Ktsas. Ein Shemeya means he doesn't hear the way other people hear, the way normal people hear, but at the very minimum he's a Shemeya Ktsas. Now, the real problem that I have, and the only real chiddush that I want to talk about today, whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but at least it's novel, is Pshat in the Rambam. Why do you need a Shemeya Ktsas? What is the Shemeya Ktsas going to do here? So let me digress a little bit, because I think that's the Yesod of the Rambam, the Yesod of the Gemara. There are cognate words in several languages: Greek, Arabic, and Lashon Kodesh. In Greek it's called the logos. Logos is a homonym in Greek. It means word and it means reason. And unfortunately, it has been mistranslated. The English translators didn't know whether they were translating the word or reason, particularly in the work that I cannot cite in these hallowed precincts. But that's one. In Greek, it's clear that logos, it means reason and means speech. In Arabic, kala, the mutakalamim, which the Rambam translates as the midabrim. Now, the Rambam was misunderstood.
Sadia does that too.
Yeah, good, but the Rambam was misunderstood. They left Sadia alone. I don't know why. But they said that the Chokrim, the scholars. Kala. Yeah, he knows better than I. Huh? No, kala. It's like a lamed at the end, an aleph at the end. Chof aleph, lamed aleph.
Yeah.
At least, yeah, okay. No, that's not challah.
Everybody, the very Hashem Moshe Lemor is like challah, and then chalach, and then Hashem.
Yes, correct.
Al Moshe,
Yes,
whatever.
okay. Okay, so the scholars thought that the Rambam was making fun of the Kalam philosophers, of the Arab philosophers, when he called them. They thought that they had picked in the Kudus midabrim, which is like his spile, like Kol Hashem. I'm sorry. If the Balkoyer reads it midaber instead of midaber, you have to read it over. Midaber is a hispile, and what it means to translate it in Yiddish from sich allein, of itself. That's what the word means in that context. It's a hispile, not an ordinary peel. And they thought that he was saying this, and in effect, if we were to translate medabrim into English, that you translate it as prattlers, that these people didn't know what they were talking about. That's why he calls them medabrim. Now, in point of fact, he was paying them a high compliment, because in Lashon Kodesh, a medaber, if you look at the hierarchy of created entities, the medaber is the one who's on top. He's on top because he talks or he reasons. That's the word means both. speech and reason, just as it did in Greek and just as it does in Arabic. There's a double connotation to the word. So there is a relationship between speech and reason. It's not just an accident. The relationship between speech and reason, the Rambam was already Magalea. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But the best source for all of this is Hobbes in the Leviathan, in which he says that, to the best of his knowledge, humans are only people who talk, and humans are only people who have reason. Forget about dolphins. Dolphins are supposed to have speech. I don't know about that. I don't know whether it's deep or it's not deep. But he says, and that's because he thinks that speech gives rise to reason. There were chelkim among the philosophers who thought there was reason that gave rise to speech, but I'm not terribly interested in which came first, the chicken or the egg. He recognized that the two came together. In his language, he says that all reason is sublingual speech. If you couldn't speak, you couldn't think. What are you going to think in? Some people think in one language, other people speak in other languages. It's a well-known phenomenon. Most people speak in their native language, think in their native language, dream in their native language, count money in their native language.
I mentioned to Rebbe, there's a child psychiatrist in San Francisco named Norter, and she says that a part of the problem working with victims of trauma, if they experience a trauma at a pre-verbal age, it's difficult to work in psychotherapy because the memories were laid down in a pre-verbal way and cannot be accessed in a verbal way. The whole experience was pre-verbal. And it's almost inaccessible.
Very interesting. She's a Hobbesian, Leviathan. Do you have a copy or something or a reference? Not now. Okay. If you can get it to me, I'd appreciate it. Okay, that's not important. But let me go back to what we're talking about. There's clearly a correlation between reason and speech. Now, what the correlation is precisely, we'll have to see in a moment. I want to talk about Cheresh and how this relates to the notion of a Cheresh. There aren't all that. There are many sources. Particularly with regard to the modern Shaila, of the educated Cheresh, who certainly has intelligence. If you talk about intelligence in a non-halachic sense of the term. But the question is, and what is the status of Cheresh in halacha and why? Now, I think it's Reb Shlomo Zalman in the Mincha Shlomo. He's one of the major sources for this. It doesn't have a lot there, but it's very important. He points out, correctly, to the best of my knowledge at least, that we don't have a Yalfusa to tell me that the Cheresh is postulatus, the Cheresh is quoted from mitzvahs. For our Kotan, we've got sources, but for Cheresh, nobody has sources. And when we talk about Cheresh of a cotton. It's all in one breath. It sounds as if a Cheresh is just another kind of a cotton. Cotton doesn't have das, and a Cheresh doesn't have das. A Shaita certainly doesn't have das, so it sounds as if they're all the same thing. Reb Shlomo Zalman points out that, how do you know this? Just because they're all linked together, they're together in the psulim for whatever purpose. But we don't have a Yafusa altogether. Now, what that means is one of two things, and this is, I think it's elementary, it's no great kiddush. Although the word, as was pointed out earlier by Rabbi Willig, a Cheresh is either posel edus and he's mufka for mitzvahs, either because he has no das, or because halacha meish misinai. It could be because halacha meish misinai. There's nothing else is possible. It's one of the two. So we have now and if you're going to ask me what is the nafkamina, I think that there are several nafkaminas. The first nafkamina is if you have a Cheresh who has das, a Cheresh who solves quadratic equations. You have a Cheresh who solves with the deaf and dumb, if you like, can't speak, can't hear. Clearly this person has das. We give him all the bechinas and he passes them with flying colors. He clearly has das. If you tell me it's also like the ones that are the graduates of the Vienna School for the Deaf and Dumb, it must be because halacha meish misinai. On the other hand, if it's all chsaron and das, then I'll produce you a Cheresh who has das, it's not a moron, it can't be. I'm sorry, I'll produce you a Shaita who has das. It's not a Shaita by definition. A Cheresh who has das is by definition not a Cheresh. You may be deaf and dumb, but that's not what halacha calls a cherish. Halacha calls a cherish. It's a halachic term. It's one who is deaf and dumb, has no reason, no intellectual capacity. If you show me one who does have intellectual capacity, then by definition he's not a cherish. Like Reb Baruch Ber, a shor shel hefker is nishkin shor. The shor shel hefker, a shor shel hefker is an ox. But what he meant to say was, when the Torah talks about a shor, it's not talking about a shor shel hefker. If you have a cherish who has das, it's not the cherish ha'omer b'kro, ha'omer b'chazal. That's what this is all about. Now, if you'll ask me what my nafkamina, the first one I gave you already, I think that there is a second nafkamina, and I can't really prove it. My second nafkamina is whether you have a pikeach who is nischaresh. If it's alocha Moshe Sinai, he's now a cherish. Don't tell me that he's smart. Just like the graduates of the Vienna School for the Deaf and the Dumb, we still call him a cherish. You were once a pikeach, and now you're nishtate. You're not nishtate, but you are nischarish. You can't think anymore. Or halacha says you can't think. This das doesn't count. It's halacha Moshe Sinai. I would say that they're totally zebazeh. Now, the sources I have are really sparse. The best source that I have, and I don't have it in front of me, but you can find it, the Rav in Trumas, the very beginning of Trumas, the Bartanura says that a cherish has no das. He says it's like a shaita. I think it's as clear as can be. There are lots of people who quote the Rambam together with the Rav, but I don't think the Rambam is as clear as the Rav is at all. On the contrary, I see something in the Rambam which I think is very important, but it's not the definition. It's this second nafkamina that I gave you. Whether a person who was a cherish, was a shemeya medaber and now became a cherish, whether he has a category of a cherish or not. Unlike the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah and the Kuf Aleph, the Rambam goes out of his way in the Perush Mishnayos to tell me that if he was a Bikeach, if he was a cherish, and he's nisrape, that tells me if he can now talk. The cherish now can talk. He's telling me that he is a Bikeach or Choldover. He can be Torah. Once he can start speaking, he can be Torah. Now, as soon as he learns how to speak, that's good enough. We take it for granted that he knows whatever he knows. Now, the Pikeach Shenischaresh is the hardest of all to demonstrate. Although there seems to be a Bach and a Taz, not Bach, a Bach and a Shach. And there's then a Prima Godim, the Akdomet, or a Chaim, who seems to be Mesupik with regard to all of this. So it seems to me that there's clearly two possibilities, and I would say that I would go so far as to say that it is a machlokes, the Tur and the Rambam, for a very simple reason. The Rambam tells me that a Shemeya has to be a medaber ktsas, and if he's not a medaber, yes, a medaber. Rambam says medaber v'shemeya ktsas, because if he's a medaber ve'ena shemeya klum, then the Rambam still thinks that he has the status of a cherish. Why is a medaber ve'ena shemeya klum if he heard nothing? And how we're assuming that you have to be able to hear speech in order to develop intelligence. If he's Eina Shemea Klum, then what do I care if he's a Medaber? He wasn't able to develop reason in the first place. And my probe, the litmus test is whether he has intelligence. The litmus test is whether he's got intelligence or not, is whether he's Shemea Aksas, or whether he's not a Shemei Aksas. He doesn't have to hear everything. You don't have to have an IQ of 175 in order to be considered intelligent. He hears some things, so he knows some things. We're able to teach him some things. You weren't able to teach him other things. If you taught him the minimum, I don't know what the minimum is, what Aksas is, we'll talk about that a little bit later, that as long as he's able to Shemei Aksas, that is made on him that he has reason. So Shemeya u'medaber Aksas is fine. Shemeya ve'ena medaber klum, you can't speak at all, so there's no reason here. That doesn't work. And the Rambam is not telling me that you have to have some type of reason, and without reason, you're a cherish, and it's all totally in reason. It's not halacha mishmi sinai. If you insist, you can talk about the tour and say the tour doesn't know of any chokhmah, either a shemeya or not a shemeya, and every shemeya is not a cherish. I don't care who has intelligence, who doesn't have intelligence. I don't care if it's a medaber and a medaber. A medaber is also good enough, but a shemeya as well will make him no longer a cherish. So that would be a way of saying that this basic hakira turns out to be a machlokes rishonim. Now, I think that there are other things that are contingent thereupon. And for that, I have one very interesting source, which is not quoted as far as I know by anybody else. It's a psak din of the Beis Din HaGodol Yerushalayim. It's in volume Yud Beis. It's a psak of the Beis Din HaGodol. And the Dayonim were Rav Vaji Yosef, Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, and Yisrael Kulitz. Rav Waldenberg has written about Cherish other places in the Tzitz Eliezer, but this is something which he doesn't address in the other places. Now, there are lists of sources with regard to the educated Cherish, some of which are quoted here, some of which are not quoted here, but if you look in volume 2 of Knebber Halachic Problems, there are lists and lists of sources both ways. But the point here is that the Beis Din, it's an interesting case. The Beis Din here is dealing with a young lady from Iran who wanted to become a Geiris. The only problem was she was a Cherish, a real Cherish. Now, when I wrote about it, I didn't have it sucked in. And that's because the press made a big tumult about it. The psak din hadn't been written, but the tumult was that they refused to take her as a Geiris. Why is a separate problem? Forget about the Shusacherish. Who says you can't be Megayer Cotton? You can be Cotton. Why can't you be Megayer Cherish? That's not our problem today. But this is discrimination. You've got to make accommodations for the disabled, and halacha is not making accommodation for the disabled. It's unconstitutional or whatever. Terrible affair. And that's in that context. I wrote about the status of an intelligent cherish. I didn't use the word halacha mishmi sinai, but that's clearly what was going on here in terms of the machlekes. The machlekes, the lang and the breit, as it's in Yiddish, split down the middle. I think there's many sources one way as there are the other way.
Line is bright, what do you say? What's the
So,
expression in Yiddish?
in the length and the breit, in the length and the width,
What's it in Yiddish again? In the line?
in the length and the breit.
Still on length and width.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
There's a clear machlekes. Why there's a machlekes? It's easy now, but they don't tell me this chikira is the halacha mishmi sinai, or is it simply a measure of who's got das, who doesn't have das? But it's clear that's what they're saying. You don't have to put it in so many words. A baby without a name is also a baby. You don't have to give it a name for it. That's clearly what they're saying. In any event, the psak din is significant because it deals with two separate issues that have nothing to do with they have a lot to do, but they're not the same as what we're talking about now. First of all, what's a medaber and what's a shemeya? What's a shemeya we have earlier sources for, the best of which is, or at least the most authoritative of which, is the Avnei Nezer. Avnei Nezer, Cheshemishbit Simin Kuf Nun. Lididi Poshut, Shemeni Shemeya Dibur, Af Aidei Chatzeitzreis Choshev Cherish. Now, the Chatzeitzreis he's talking about is an ear trumpet. I have never seen an ear trumpet, but it seems to me an ear trumpet probably works like a megaphone. So if you put it in your ear instead of, talking on it and the whole mandaboy, to the whole world. Shemea koil b'li chituch dibur. A person who hears without the chituch hadibur, he doesn't hear speech. He hears sounds, the sound of a tree falling in the forest. If you can hear the tree falling in the forest, or you can hear thunder, that doesn't make you a pikeach. The measuring rod is the speech. I don't think that's a great chiddush, but he's telling me this. He says the shmi osay dibur makshiva pikeach, which, in light of what I said before, is very mistaver. What do I care about this dibur for? Why is it medaber a siman that he is a pikeach, because he was a medaber. Means he has reason. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to learn how to speak in the first place. He had to learn how to speak because he has reason. Let's go hand in hand. So he's telling me, and I want to know the point that the business is making is that people lots of deaf people, so-called deaf, quotation marks, they're not really deaf, and when they listen, they hear a little bit and they lip read. And the two together tell them what's going on, or at least most of what's going on. They fill in with the lip reading instead of hand signals. They're reading lips, but together they're able to figure things out. The whole point that the Bez is making is that lip reading is not shemiya, it's not dibur. That lip reading doesn't count. And he says, you want to know whether a person's lip reading? There are two ways to do this. I'll tell you whether somebody's lip reading or whether he's hearing because he's got some kind of residual hearing or he's hearing on his hearing aids. Some people with hearing aids are hearing because they have the hearing aid plus the lip reading. Together they're able to follow conversations. Talk to him from the back. If he's lip reading, he won't understand you. If you talk to him from the front and he understands you and not from the back, it means he's lip reading. Or use numbers. I'll tell you better, use monosyllables, because what's happening with filling in with the lip reading, he caught a couple of syllables, he caught something, the lips, he puts them together, he puts the syllables together. If you have a monosyllable like numbers, numbers are all up to 10. Up to 10, they're all monosyllables. So if he hears them, he's hearing a dibur. If he can't hear numbers, that means he can't hear a dibur. That's the criterion. That's number one. Then there's a second problem with regard to what's called speech. What's called speech? Now, they don't give the example, but it seems to me that somebody who stutters has got perfectly good speech. Somebody can be deaf and talk and stutter. What's stuttering is speech, that's good. But there's something else that they call lag, or whatever word they use. I don't quite know what the etymology is, where it comes from. But there's guttural speech, and guttural speech isn't really speech. I knew only one Cheresh who couldn't hear and couldn't speak. He was deaf and dumb, and he had guttural speech. I couldn't understand it, and I don't think anybody else could understand it. But he communicated not with sign language, but he communicated in one way or another. And people seem to be able to parse out what some of these guttural sounds are supposed to be. But to me, I didn't hear a single sound. The question is, what is this loshen loyagim, and what's real speech? At what point is it speech, and what point is it not speech? And Besdin says that, of course, if you need speech of one kind or another, according to the Rambam, it's got to be real speech. If it's not real speech, it means that you are hearing the words with the chituch hadibur, that you're hearing the real sound of the word. That doesn't count speech. That's their proba. When you hear somebody talking, is he talking just indistinctly, but you strain yourself, you understand, or is there something missing in the chituch hadibur? I don't think that's true, but that's for my reason. If I was right in the first point, I think I'm right in the second point as well. Again, there are people who do all of this. I had in my shul two brothers. One was a Pikeach Godel, and the other, who was perfectly rational, but he couldn't hear. He wore hearing aids, and his speech was, I won't say guttural, it was beyond guttural, but I couldn't understand him. His brother understood perfectly. The brother understood everything that he was saying. And I suspect there must have been something wrong with me, not with regard to him. He must have had this, whatever they're calling the lag. It was words, the chituch hadibur had to be there. Otherwise, how did the brother know it? This was not using sign language, and it wasn't reading lips. So apparently, he was speaking clear enough for some person who was really smart, knew how to figure it out. He knew whether he was talking or not. Yeah?
A parent understands a baby much better than anyone else, but that's not because the baby speaks, it's because the parent understands what the different words are that the baby, what the different things are that the baby's saying.
Again, we have an expert on the child development and reason and speech of a child. It seems to me that children aren't a very good example, particularly children who are interacting with parents, because children don't speak in full syllables. I'll give you an example. One of my oldest daughter, Allah Shalom, when she was small, she kept saying "doy," and I had the vaguest idea what she was talking about until her cousin walked in. His name is Tveira, and she says "doy" and puts out her hand to the cousin. She was clearly trying to say a full word, and at that point, I didn't understand it. After I knew what it meant, so now every time she says, I know what she means. But that's only because I've been let in on the secret, not because of Chiduch HaDibur. I've been able to translate the experience one form or another. It's not because she's communicating in full speech. Is that called a medaber? For purposes of halacha, I'll have a cheresh who says doy, or a cheresh who says ma instead of mama or something. Yes?
I know I'm going afield. What about if someone has, for totally unrelated, not neurological, a smoker has had laryngeal carcinoma, had a complete laryngectomy, but they learn esophageal speech?
H.G. Wells. Doctor, what was his name? Mariah, who is his bad guy who creates all kinds of things.
The other Dr. Moreau?
Okay. Dr. Moreau. He gave his animals larynxes so they should speak. He wanted to make them rational, so he gave them a larynx also. I don't think he gave them anything else except a larynx, so he called that speech. Now, I don't know what an artificial larynx does for a person. I know how it works, but is they no longer a cherish. I'll take a cherish and I'll give him, again, you're making several presumptions. You're telling me a pikeyash and a cherish has a din of a cherish. And now you want to know whether the speech is good enough. I will soon tell you that Pikeyash and Ischaresh, if he's not a halacha Moshe Sinai, he clearly has das. That's what I was next sentence going to be. That the Rambam says you have to have a little dibur. You know I have to have a little dibur because I want to know whether you're really a shemea. A shemea means that you understand, not that you hear sounds. But can you pick up things from hearing, which means you develop reason? The only way you'll know that is if you're medaber tzas. If you're medaber tzas, you can know some things. I don't have to give you an IQ test. Whatever the shear of tzas is, that's good enough. Which leads me to what I think is a chidush. The Bezdin says we don't know the boundary between what's this called lag or loshen lagim, whatever they call it, and real speech. But someplace there has to be a distinction. Somebody stutters. That's not there's example. Someone stutters. We know it's speech. Something in between, I don't know. And then there's a kind of speech, the guttural speech, as I called it, which is certainly not speech. Now, if you're telling me that this is halacha Moshe Sinai, and you've developed a artificial larynx or whatever they do there to create some stoma in the throat so that you can talk through your vocal, not using vocal cords, but you learn how to use the airways in order to talk. It would seem to me it's the same shaila as halacha Moshe Sinai. I think this is artificial. I don't think that this is natural. I'll give you other things that seem to be artificial and seem to be totally in the shaila. So if you're telling me that I need a medaber, forget about the shemaya, for all I know, and you're doing something with artificial speech is a speech. If you're talking about reason, then I can find other ways of doing it. Give an IQ test. I know he had reason from before he got this carcinoma. That's how it would seem to me. But you're absolutely right that this is one of the other nafkamis. Nobody talks about that halacha l'maisa, but they should. Is this considered to be a medaber and not a medaber? Particularly if you're dealing with whose persons are the shemei also. Otherwise, it makes nafkamis for the Rambam. Halacha is not like the Rambam. But this seems to me exactly to fit into precisely what we're talking about. So we've got the Bezdin couldn't make up its mind. Says it's I don't know how you could make up your mind. What's the difference between this what I call guttural speech, lashon al-yagim, and what is considered acceptable speech? But it's got to be a real speech, just like the hearing has to be real hearing and not some kind of artificial hearing of one kind or another, half hearing. Hearing, they make a difference between hearing bekoshi and hearing klum. Now, koshi means I can hear if I try hard enough. Koshi means that if you shout in my ear, I'll know every word you said because I just have to have some kind of amplification of the sounds, but I'm perfectly capable of hearing all of this if you shout in my ear. Whereas if at the end I don't hear real speech, I don't hear anything. That doesn't count at all. And they make the same thing with regard to dibur. There's dibur that's understandable, and there's dibur which is loshen halayagim. I would say that if I'm right with regard to my pshat in the Rambam, I couldn't care less if it's loshen halayagim. Makes no difference whatsoever, because a person who speaks loshen halayagim, people can learn what he means, and that means that he's perfectly rational. The difference between the dibur of kituch dibur and other kinds of dibur is whether I have to supply my own reasoning to your speech in order to figure out, or hearing to figure out what you're saying, or hearing. The same thing in reverse. If you are speaking this loshen haloyagim and I understand what you're saying, then I don't know that you have reason in order to speak. However, I do know one thing, that if I can figure out what you're saying, I use my reason to figure out what you're saying, which means that if you said it so that I should understand it, you're communicating with me on the level of reason. You had to understand what you were gutturalizing, to coin the term. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense to me. The fact that I know what you're saying means that you had reason in order to say what you said, which means that the speech is a raya, that the verbalization that you went through was a verbalization that reflected reasoning. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to speak in the way that I would understand. As long as I can understand what you're talking about, whether it's chitur hadibur or not chitur hadibur, it seems to me to be absolutely good. Now, I don't have anybody who says something of the sort, because when you go looking for all the sources, they split down the middle, and you have at least this psak of the Besna who says we don't know how you determine what rises to the loshen, or what sinks to loshen alayagim, and which rises above loshen alayagim. But if there is such a machlekes rishonim with regard to the definition of a cheresh, and what's totally in whether it's halacha but it should be sidai, then or it's whether it's reason, then if it's totally reason, then I need shmi dibur, nothing in between, nothing else will help, and I have to have a real dibur or a real shmi, and nothing's going to help, including artificial voice. And if it's a matter of reason, then IQ test will also work. The diploma from the deaf dumb school in Vienna or from London will also be sufficient for these purposes. That's how I think that you, and I think nafkamina is with regard to PK actually Cheresh as well. It's halacha Moshe Sinai, and as Reb Shlomo Zalman pointed out, I don't have a yalfus for Cheresh. It all depends on reason, and if it all depends on reason, then if it doesn't all depend on reason, it's halacha Moshe Sinai. And where do I know a distinction between a Cheresh Meleida or a Pikeach Shenischaresh? Where is there any kind of yalfus that draws me a difference? It's halacha Moshe Sinai. That's how I would understand these different shittas in halacha. Now, let me talk a little bit about hearing aids, and maybe then a little bit about the cochlear implants. Talk about hearing aids, you have to talk about microphones. Now, one of the things that Rosh Shlomo Zalman says in the Chemda Shlem, I think it's Lamed Beis, he talks about all those people who think you can be Yitzhak, Kriyas HaTorah, forget Kriyas HaTorah, Mikra Megillah, Tia Shofar, on a microphone. He says he doesn't understand them. You're not hearing a human voice at all. You're not. You do not hear a human voice. Now, if you want how to prove it, it's really very simple to prove. Now, besides the fact that it's in terms of the science, it's elementary. But I have on occasion spoken in public, besides Shabbos. And when I speak during the week, it's almost invariably on a microphone. And I wanted to experiment. What can I possibly hear my own voice if I'm talking over a microphone? I wonder what the people out there are hearing. Even if they wanted to, could they hear my voice or couldn't they? So I did an experiment. My experiment was to pace around the microphone. And I can tell you that there are times when I can hear myself loud and clear. I can also hear the microphone. Trey Coley, who cares? I did the chvivi, I can hear both. And there are times when I talk at the microphone and I can't hear myself talk. I can hear the microphone talking, but I know it's a microphone and it's not me. But I don't need this to prove it. when you're talking to a microphone, you're taking sound waves. The sound waves go into the microphone, and the sound waves cause the diaphragm or crystal. I understand the diaphragm better. The diaphragm causes the diaphragm to move exactly in sync with my voice, and the diaphragm produces sound waves. The only way I can hear any sound, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a vacuum, you can't hear anything. You hear only because sound waves go through some medium. They go through the air, the ether, who knows what. And then they, some way or another, they hit my inner ear, and the inner ear causes the cilia, the little hairs on the inside of the eardrum. They cause them to move, and that stimulates the auditory nerve. It's the eighth cranial nerve, and you don't hear with your ears, you hear with your brain. It's the nerve that causes you to hear, and unless you can stimulate the nerve, you're not hearing. So what I have on a microphone is something very strange. The diaphragm, I didn't realize it till years ago. I began doing whatever little research I could do on microphones. It turns out that not only does the diaphragm create its own hearing, its own waves, but you hear the whatever goes on in the ear is as a result of what the diaphragm did, and then it changes into some kind of electric waves, and the electric waves reproduce speech, and then in the inner ear it causes the fluid to move, which causes the hairs and the cochlea to vibrate, and lo, you hear. But it seems that when you're hearing there, it sounds to me that it's like a koyach shlishi, because I'm making the diaphragm move. The diaphragm is making something in the ear move, and that's creating new speech. So I've got the third speech. When I hear, it's really the third speech. Of course, that's not speech. I mean, tell me that's speech. How could it be speech? Ramesh and others thought it was speech, and that, Shlomo Zalman doesn't go through the mechanics or the science, but he says, how in the world could this possibly work? It can't work. It's not hearing anything. Fine. So I had problems, and I hear people making havdolah on the microphone. Telephone is halachas kama v'kama. If telephone is even more removed, you're transferring it into all kinds of things I don't know about. In fact, I think I can consider it almost Purim Torah. But I once read a whole article about somebody who wanted to know whether you can say Torah on the microphone or brachos on telephone, or brachos on telephone, because the waves go through mekomes metunofim, and you're not allowed to say Torah and brachos and mekomes metunofim, as if there would have been a voice in these mekomes metunofim.
There are also goyim between us and them that are mafsik us.
I'm sorry?
There are goyim in between also.
So they're going in between too. So
Goyim are mafsik also. Let's say you have one communion, or you want to answer the worship.
goy.
The goy is mafsik and davar shebekdusha.
Oh, okay. If he's standing there, then all right. I'm not sure he's standing there because this goes in one telephone and to another telephone. Who says it was a good mafsik? The mekomes metunofim I can understand, but I'm not sure anything else is mafsik. I mean, to me, this is total. I just can't I can't get my mind around it. There's no sound in between. There's a sound when I talk and a sound on the other end. What's going on in between, I don't know, and I don't care. You want to know whether it's a sound or not a sound? I know this not my sound that's coming out the other side. Somebody else's sound, some other sound. It's a mechanical sound that's coming out, not a human sound. How in the world? You talk about a microphone. Somebody can say, "Who cares? Microphone, voice, it's all the same thing." Don't confuse me with things that it's not near la'ayin or nishma lo'izen. You have to know a little bit of physics to know what it's all about, and it doesn't count. I don't know. That's not what Ramesh says. But some people might think that. I don't know. When we talk about telephone, I don't understand how you can extend that to telephone, because that you don't have to have any science whatsoever to know that the sound that you're hearing is not the sound that went into the telephone. It may sound exactly the same. It's certainly not the same, which is why I have problems with regard to tzivui habal on a telephone. I'm not sure it's the voice of the husband. I don't think it's the voice of the husband. Does that help or not? I don't know. Maybe if Kisvut Nu helps. But if Kisvut Nu doesn't help, this certainly doesn't help. I think it definitely can't help if Kisvut Nu doesn't help. But that's the problem with the ordinary microphone. Let me go. We'll come to the hearing aid in a second. Reb Moshe shouldn't have had any problems. He thought that that a microphone is perfectly okay for Kiddush and Havdalah and for everything else. And as I said before, to be mitzi the chosn with birchas erisin and birchas nesuyim seems to be a birchas haidah of the whole kahal. So you have to be mitzi everybody, and how can you do it on a microphone? So the only ace is to push the microphone away so that you'll be able to hear you talking, not the microphone talking. And nobody seems to be choshish for that. I don't think they even realize that there's a problem. Kiddush and Havdalah, they'll understand, but the birchas erisin, birchas nesuyim, nobody seems to recognize. There's some people who are, but I don't know, we're out there, it's not enforced. The Ramesha, when he talks about the hearing aid, he shouldn't have had any problem with hearing aids, except if he realizes that it's a kol shlishi instead of a kol sheni. I don't know what the difference is, whether it's a kol sheni or kol shlishi or a kol revi. What difference does it make? So he should have had no problems at all. But there's an interesting tshuva in which he says that hearing aids are perfectly okay, but only if the person has a certain degree of hearing. Now, before I go to Rav Moshe, I think that the basic underlying premise till Rav Moshe redefined it is very simple, and that takes me to my Sefer in Yerushalayim. If a person has hearing aids, don't help unless you have some residual hearing. Microphones won't help for a deaf person because all the microphone can do is amplify an existing sound. If you don't have an existing sound, it's not going to do anything. The difference between an ear trumpet and a megaphone is that, or for that matter, a kol havara. A kol havara is the koyach sheni. Kol havara is the sound wave creating new sound waves, and those sound waves come back, and there's a gap in time. So first you hear the first sound wave, then you hear the second sound wave. It bounces off the side of the cave, and it comes back, and you're hearing a second sound wave, and it's clear it's an echo. That's what the sound wave is. The echo is a kol havara, and that's pretty clear. A megaphone that we have a Pri Chodosh, it's not Baruch Hashem the Pri Chodosh. Pri Chodosh said that the megaphone or the ear trumpet, they're both the same, are perfectly okay because it simply magnifies the existing sound. Well, that's what he means. What he's telling me is a megaphone does something different. The megaphone also causes the sound to bounce back, but not as a distinct sound. It coalesces. The old sound, the new sound became one sound. The old sound had the echo or merely the new sound. And the Pri Chodosh told me a Kiddush Godel. They don't have to have a pure sound. You can enhance the sound. The sound is enhancing itself.
Is it called sheni? Or my understanding of megaphone is that ordinarily when I speak, whatever sound waves producing is being diffused throughout the atmosphere, and here the solid sound prevents it, so it's just my voice being, instead of diffusing, it's all my voice being
correct.
concentrated.
But so what am I here? Why do you need a megaphone for?
Well, it's not called sheni.
Why isn't it called sheni?
Was the same voice that
it's not the same voice. Why is it louder than without the megaphone?
Because I'm not losing.
You didn't lose the first one, which is another way of saying that the second one superimposed on the first doesn't make any difference because you're hearing the first.
No,
if I didn't have a Pri Chodosh, I would certainly be arguing here that a megaphone is no good.
No good.
It's really.
I don't think it's the second sound because ordinarily when I'm speaking now, you're losing some of the volume to the side, and here the original sound has been concentrated, and it's one voice it's not being lost to the side, it's being directed more narrowly, the same original voice.
Oh, you're telling me that it's not allowing any sounds to escape out there.
That focuses the sound.
That's not the way I understand the literature.
Okay.
I understand literature is telling me that yes, it's bouncing back. It hit the side and it bounced back.
I guess we'll have to ask the physicist.
Yes, the physicist. I don't know any of this. I'm repeating what I've been fed one way or another.
Okay, there's an electronic megaphone, and then there's
electronic megaphones or microphones.
That's how we're doing.
I wasn't talking about that.
Okay, fine.
No, he's talking about the
Well, the calf, they tell you, time full of shoppers.
It just reflects the sound from the sides. And
yes, reflects the sound from the sides, and it bounces back on the original ones, which give it a higher volume, which means I have two sounds. It amplifies it. That's right. But that's not what he's saying.
I thought it was
Dr. Cooper's saying something else. He's telling me
We're
that
we're
it
not
does.
wasting, we're not wasting,
We're not. When I talk,
I'm conserving it all.
I'm not
instead of
screaming.
Is
something-
that the same thing that it
no,
bounces?
Alright,
no,
alright,
no, 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 no,
I'm
no,
the
no,
Texas
no.
physicist.
He's telling me that when I talk, there's a lot of sound waves that are wasted.
Yeah, it goes
I
the
talk, you hear the ones that are directed to you, but there are a lot of sound waves that are going who knows where.
They reverberate against.
They're not reverberate, they're gone, they're lost, forget it, they're not there. And outside, there's nothing to reverberate from.
Okay,
They're lost.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. And he's telling me the megaphone doesn't let them escape. It keeps them in so that you hear an amplified sound.
That's the point.
That's
Yeah.
not my understanding, and
But that's what I'm
ask
saying.
him, don't ask me.
What does Rabbi say?
My understanding is that I need the megaphone not just to prevent the sounds from escaping, although I presume it does that too, but it causes the sound to bounce back. It's really a kol havora, only it bounces back before I finished hearing the first sound. So they kind of become a simultaneous trei koli. And these are trei koli which are mishtame as kol echad. Trei koli, the mishtame kechad kol, says, I'm making up the words, is what the Pechodesh says is shmir.
Isn't it just reverberating? And Rabbi hears both the sound wave that was coming directly plus. the
But not as
reverberation
separate
together.
sounds. Kol havora, I know they're separate
No,
sounds.
they come together. Yeah.
And
The
here the-
reverberation and the regular sound.
And,
comes
and
together.
now they come together and they become more audible, they're higher in tone, but it's now a single sound made of two sounds.
What's the difference between that and
Kol havora?
having
Yeah, because I don't hear the same time. Kol havora, I hear two sounds at two separate times.
Okay, but that's
Megaphone, I hear two sounds at one time.
That's just because the reverberation took longer. If you're in a smaller room, you'll hear it faster. Right here, there is a reverberation in my voice. I
But
hear it now.
we're talking about two separate things. You're talking about an echo that you hear from your voice. That's not a coil. If you hear an echo, that's not a coil. It's kol
Sound
havora.
bounces here, there, and comes back there.
That's not kol havora. Kol havora, if you're hearing two separate sounds, it's called kol havora. If you can't distinguish between the two sounds, it's called kula choda kola. It's what I call amplifying the original sound,
But-
which what I said a few sentences ago. If I were living before the Pri Chodosh, I would be the first one to argue who says this is a coil. This is not a normal coil. You took a coil, you took a second coil, and you put them together, and you want to tell me I did the chvivi? Maybe, but without I did the chvivi, it can't be a single coil because it's two coils. You just put them all together. Who says one coil's not? The first coil's not bottled, the second coil. Thank Baruch Hashem, the Pri Chodesh said it. He says the first coil is not bottled, the second coil, and I understand it even on my girsa, not Dr. Cooper's girsa. On my girsa, it's because it's a second coil which bounced back to the first coil. But who cares as long as they're not perceived as two separate coils? Then it's one coil. A microphone is two separate coils. Everybody knows it's two separate coils. They're enough people to perceive it as
But a megaphone, how is the megaphone?
a megaphone. I understand as the ear trumpet. That's what I'm describing. I've now been describing a megaphone, not a microphone.
Yes.
Yeah.
A megaphone, no, a microphone.
A
is two
microphone
separate
is a
coils.
new coil. I know that.
Yeah, for sure, but a
I call it
megaphone is.
I understand it as a new coil. I mean, not a new coil. A new coil which is created and superimposed upon the first. Add 10 and 10, you get 20. Add 10 decibels on the first, another 10 decibels, and I get 20 decibels. But it's two separate coils. Only they are indistinguishable to my ear.
What makes it? So I think Rebbe is saying that a megaphone is two separate colos, but we reflected the second one back in so that it joins and adds on.
Right. Right.
So I'm saying, what's the difference between that and any reverberation that I have? If I'm speaking outdoors, if I'm speaking in this room, here there's reverberation. I hear it in my own voice sitting right here. That my voice is more amplified than if I was standing outside. If my voice bounces off of this, off of that, off of there, and it comes back.
Sure it does.
So what's the difference between that and the megaphone?
That's a megaphone.
So it's all the same. So if I read the Megillah indoors.
Oh, you're telling me that indoors you have the same problem?
Yes.
That proves I'm right.
It's just a scaling issue.
No, yes. Again, all right. If you're telling me that if the Pri Chodesh wouldn't have said it, you would have come and argued that even indoors I get a coil avara, that there is no such thing as no coil avara.
Yeah. Wherever you are indoors, you're going to hear it, depending on how hard the
That's why I think
surfaces
my
are.
analysis is correct.
Okay, but then how can Rebbe say that a megaphone is a problem?
I didn't say it's a problem.
It's two colos.
It is two.
the same colo.
You're telling me that in this room it's two coils.
Yeah,
I buy
it's
that.
LMI, it's the
I have
same
no problem.
colo. It's the same colo, came from the same place.
Why is it the same coil?
Because would Rabbi you say that I'm not Yotze Mikra Megillah here because there's two kolos?
Why? But why? Forget that you're not
Just
using
just
that megaphone.
It's a natural definition of I'm speaking. It's one kol.
As long as I hear it as one
Yeah,
coil. Whatever I hear is one coil is one coil.
I think so.
Because
Because it's the same way.
it's not a
sound
coil
works.
avora. You're saying the same thing. I'm explaining the science.
Okay.
I'm telling you that it's because the sound has bounced back
Yeah.
and amplified the original coil, and you hear it as one.
Okay.
Right? Whatever you hear as one is one.
Okay.
A microphone you do not hear as one.
So, but I don't, okay, good. We're on the same page.
Okay, yeah, we're the
What's the
same
difference
thing.
between that and Dr. Cooper's head?
Hmm?
What's the difference between that and what
He is telling me this is different science. He is telling me that there's not that the room is a bigger problem than the megaphone. The megaphone doesn't allow airwaves to escape, and that's why I hear it louder.
That's why I'm checking on my code news to read some physics.
He says megaphones don't make them bounce back. I'm saying they bounce back. He says they don't bounce back.
Okay, so we'll have
They
to
just
wait.
don't escape. Sound waves can escape if you let them. The megaphone doesn't let them escape. It confines them.
Maybe
Doesn't-
Mochi Hakatan here is a brisker Hakira of what makes the tea sweet. Is it the stirring or the sugar? It doesn't escape, so it bounces.
No. I can analyze that Hakira also.
No,
This
this
is
is an
not-
article.
Did I?
Oh no, Rebecca for it. Either way. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
This is quite different. This is a real Hakira.
yeah.
Okay. All right. All right.
Mochi
Now,
Hakatan.
so where was I? The hearing aids. The hearing aids have microphones. So if a microphone is no good, a hearing aid is also no good. I think the person who wears a hearing aid, presuming that he's hard of hearing in two ears, that he has to take off both hearing aids. And I said before, there's residual hearing. I don't know if it's enough to hear Mikra Megillah or not, or Tkiya Shofar. Let him stand right next to the Baltikaya, the Balkaya, and listen. If he hears, he hears. And if he doesn't hear, in the Srachmana Patre, using microphones and hearing aids aren't going to help you at all on my analysis of a hearing aid. And therefore, you are safe from Yerushalayim if you forget about Tzivui Habal. If you want to know whether he's a shaiter or not, as he's not a shaiter, he has hearing. So how can he possibly be a shaiter? He's got a hearing aid. And the hearing aid tells me he's got reason, v'chulei, v'chulei. If you want to know the Tzivui Habal, well, if he's got two ears and he's listening carefully and he can hear with the other ear also, Trei koli, good enough. I hope, but I would say the same principle here. But that's as far as the Sefer Yerushalayim is concerned. Rav Moshe shouldn't have had any problems because he thinks that a microphone is like everything else. So all that the hearing aid is, as far as Rav Moshe analyzes it, is another kind of a microphone. But says he. I'm probably interpreting him, and I hope I'm interpreting him correctly. What I think he's saying is that you have to have some kind of hearing, otherwise amplification isn't going to help, because there has to be something on the amplification to be chalan. Let me retranslate it. We all know the minimus on Kogit Lex. A sheretz is a sheretz if I can see it. I take a drop of water and I put it under a microscope. That's not called a sheretz, because a sheretz, which you can't see, that's not called a sheretz. He seems to be saying that a sound which you can't hear isn't a sound as far as you're concerned. And don't tell me you're amplifying that sound and now you can hear it. You didn't have a sound to amplify in the first place. It's microscopic sound, coined a new term. In fact, microscopic sound for a Moshe isn't a sound. Now, I have two questions, not shilas, not kashas. Two things I want to know from Rav Moshe. Number one, the trumpet, I presume is not chaylik on the Pri Chodesh. Who told you that without a megaphone, I have a sheer of hearing? Maybe this guy is such a cheresh that without a megaphone, he can't hear enough, whatever your sheer is. No residual hearing at all. You'll tell me that the ear trumpet doesn't help unless he can hear something. Now, I know you can tell. If you shout in his ear and he hears something. Less than that, I don't know. So you're telling me that you can't use a ear trumpet either unless you can hear something. I haven't seen any place who says that. That doesn't make very much sense to me. Now, that's number one. Number two, and Rav Moshe is not responsible for this, but Rav Shlomo Zalman told me that if I do a genetic implant from a lemon onto a esrog, it's not harkava. even though the gene that I'm implanting is invisible to the naked eye. Says he, Kevin, there's a stereo in two volumes. Different people put them out. I'm saying, but he was Messiah, if anything. They had different manuscripts. Maybe Shlomo Zalman taught different things at different times. But he says that Kivin Shemetaplin, it's okay because it's kind of an actually svara. If it's so small nobody can see it, then there's nothing. But if you're in the laboratory and you're patching with it, and you're putting it into an esrog, and things are happening as a result, that you can't say it doesn't exist. That's why I say non-cogit lex. Sometimes you have to take cognizance. The law has to take cognizance of it if you can see the results. What about Rav Moshe? I can see the results because if there was nothing there, I couldn't hear. If I see something under a microscope and I can manage to do something with it, Rav Zalman says it counts. So if I have something which nobody can hear, it doesn't have the sheer shmiya, the basic shmiya, like there's a shiriya who says that if I'm mentapel with it, it isn't good enough. But that's only whether if I want to know if Moshe is oila b'kon echad with Shlomo Zalman or not b'kon echad with Shlomo Zalman. Either way, I don't really think it's terribly important because it seems to me that if a microphone isn't hearing, then a hearing aid is certainly not hearing. It's worse than a microphone because instead of being a keach sheni, it's a keach shlishi, who knows what. All kinds of things going on there. Now that takes me, it's over time, but a little bit, the cochlear implants. The cochlear implants, as I heard from a mumcha, professor of audiology, who I presumed was a bar samcha, he was telling me that it's got nothing to do with a microphone and nothing to do with a hearing aid. That the kunz is that the cochlear implant, and it's in volume 7, it's the scientific process is defined in lay language, but in detail, and I think it's rather clear detail. I'm trying to give you a Loshen Odom synopsis of it. He tells me that the cochlear implant goes right into the cochlea, and it moves the fluid, which is what happens in all hearing, and that fluid stimulates the cilia, and that causes the auditory nerve to hear. So in effect, you've bypassed everything. All you did was you caused hearing to take place in the neuro section of the hearing problem, which means there's no second coil. There's no coil sheni, there's no kol havara here. And I thought there was a dover posher, there's no kol havara. And it turns out that's right, there is no kol havara. But there seems to be things here that I don't know about. What's going on here is that in the cochlear implant, there is a microphone. And you talk into the microphone. And instead of creating sound waves in the middle, it does all kinds of electrical things, and you collect electronic waves that now go and stimulate something else. So you don't get a koil havora be'emtza, but you get a kind of a electronic koil be'emtza. Now that's quite different from what I described in the first place. What I described in the first place, I assume couldn't present a problem. I didn't care about the things that were happening inside, because it was the stimuli were going directly to whatever goes into the ear. I presume that somebody is a Cheresh, and because his bones are diseased, 3 little bones in there, and you place them with some kind of a prosthesis. I don't think anybody would claim just because it's made out of plastic or wood or who knows what, instead of bone, that makes any difference. I don't know, halacha you've seen that, you have to hear through those little bones. I know that Shemiya, the Checha Shemiya, is in the auditory nerve. That's what Chazal told us. Shemim es hanireh, v'nishroim es hanishma. They realize it's all going on in the brain. As long as you stimulate it. Whatever stimulates a direct stimulus upon the auditory nerve is what we call hearing. And I know it's not a direct stimulus on the auditory nerve. It's a direct stimulus on these 3 little bones in the fluid. That seems to be good enough because we call that hearing. So how do I care what got there? That's what the implant is supposed to be doing for me. Once you tell me that the implant is creating all kinds of electrical things in between, I don't know anymore. It's creating not a new dibur in the microphone. The way it's described It's like if I could creep into it, I would probably hear the voice. Only I can't creep into it, I don't hear the voice. They tell me the sound waves, that when I speak into a microphone, that's why I call it the koach shlishi. Not only do I have the koach sheni, the diaphragm, but inside this little contraption, there are sound waves being created. I can't hear them, I don't know why. Probably because they're subclinical or something of the sort. But they tell me that they're sound waves because it's got to be translated back into sound waves in order to work on the auditory nerve. That's what the cochlear implant has managed to do for you. You don't have to retranslate them into sound waves. But there are all kinds of things that are going on here inside that wouldn't be here without the implant. And it's not stimulating the nerve directly. At that point, they don't know anymore. Is this called shmiya or is it not called shmiya? I don't know. I don't know where it makes terribly much difference because people who have cochlear implants can't hear without the cochlear implant. So again, what I said before, either it's shmiya or in Sahara Patre.
And the 3 people have never cochlear implants still can't hear a word even though I shouted them. So
Well, I don't have that much experience, but I know the people who I talk to have cochlear implants. They hear perfectly well. I mean, I can't tell you 100%, but you can have normal conversations.
maybe it's my elocution.
No,
Also depends on what age they were when they got the implant.
Yeah,
That may be true, because there's a certain period of acclimation. You've got to learn how to know what's going on there. I think you have to learn how to think, basically. The auditory nerves are telling you how to process thought, or how to process the sound and turn it into thought, because all sound is thought. Well, now we're learning how to do it in a rather different way. Anyway, I'd come.
I texted my Mahotin who was a bachelor's in someone in my class, a PhD in physics. So I'll relay it. I sent Rebbe 3 emails.